Thank you to Paul and the team for their great work on putting all of this together. This has just been an amazing morning for us. In just a second, Governor Lee's going to join me up here, and we're going to finish up with just a little armchair discussion with each other about some of the things that we're working on and just some of the takeaways from this, and then we'll get you to lunch. I do want to posit to all of you as we're kind of having these conversations. The one thing I always leave here worried about is, how do we scale this? How do we make this bigger and broader and get more people involved? Adam, is that your name? Sorry, Adam. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I just want to thank you for that piece. We talk a lot about institutions and the failure of institutions in our country today. And oftentimes we leave out the family piece, which I believe is the most important institution in our country today. This social media discussion is one that we've been having. I think I do believe that all of the challenges that we're dealing with today have existed throughout human history and throughout American history. There's no question that we've had hard times before, we've had polarizing times before, we've had bad times before. But I think there are some differences about this time, and I think social media is one of those differences that is really pertinent to the discussions that we are having. Social media is, and I appreciate whoever it was that brought up Jonathan Haidt and his new book. I'm about halfway through it right now. I know Jonathan well. We've talked about some of his research before as he was writing the book, and it really influenced some of the legislation that we've been working on in Utah. But social media does a couple things that I think are radically challenging to all of us. Social media takes away our attention, first of all, from the things that matter. It pulls us away from our families, and it pulls us away from relationships. We are wired for relationships, and these are false relationships. As Abby talked about, the way that people feel unsafe when really they're uncomfortable, it's that it helps us avoid discomfort. We can go to another place, another world, where we don't have to have those human connections. We were talking with another group of how there's that the smartphone has turned us all into high-functioning loners. You never have to leave your home for anything now. I mean, if you do happen to go to the store, now we have self-checkout. You never have to engage with another person. But you don't have to do that anymore. You can just get your phone out, and people will come and put your food, whatever you need, right on your porch. You never have to engage with another person, and that's deeply unhealthy. So it pulls us away from real-world relationships. But then it does something even worse, and that is these algorithms are designed to divide us. To get us addicted to those platforms, and we know that outrage is addicting, and the dopamine hits that come from that turn us against each other. And it's just going to get worse as artificial intelligence now takes hold and knows more about us than we know about ourselves. And again, these scientists have figured out how to hack our brains. And so I'm deeply concerned about that. And so I appreciate you bringing it up, protecting our kids and empowering families. That's what it's really about. It's not about telling families how to raise their kids, but what we hear over and over again from parents is, I need help. I don't have the tools. I want to do this. It's a collective action problem that if every other kid has a smartphone and every other kid has social media, now your kid is not just losing out in the traditional way. As my parents said, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you, right? We all heard that from our parents. But it's something worse than that. Like their assignments, their baseball practices, they have to have that device. And so we do have this collective action problem. It's going to take all of us working together to work through that. But I really appreciate you bringing that up. I am excited as we kind of finish up today. We have a service project. Don't leave after lunch. We want to do our service project together. That's important together, that we get to serve together. But I'm excited to invite up my dear friend and my colleague, Governor Bill Lee, who's going to join me on stage, and we're going to have a great discussion about how things are happening in Tennessee and some things that we can do better as governors. I just want to talk to you a little bit about kind of some of the takeaways and some of the experiences maybe that you've had. First, let me just ask you about Tennessee, about being governor. You're in your second term as governor, and have you seen a change in kind of politics in Tennessee, in being governor from when you started to where we are now? Just talk about kind of your personal experience.
First of all, I do very much appreciate all you coming together and even listening this morning. I had to miss one section, but the topics and the conversations and the speakers, this is a conversation that needs to be elevated. It needs to be continuously talked about, because that's one of the ways that people are empowered, and they're given cover to acknowledge that this is something that bothers them, and they wish we could all disagree better, for lack of a better phrase. So I'm really grateful for this. I am a person who has tried to, I always to give the caveat, I'm not an expert on civility, and I don't have this stuff figured out any more than a lot of people do, but I want to have it figured out. It's very much a part of what I want to be, as a person who can be in a position of leadership and in politics and have very clear and firm convictions and beliefs about the things that I do believe in, but at the same time exercise and model this idea of treating people with equal dignity that I believe we all share. I think it can be done. I don't think it's done broadly across this country. And you asked about from the time I got here to today, it's gotten worse. I think our country has moved in a direction of greater levels of divisiveness and toxicity. I do blame part of that, if you want to blame it. I do believe that the onset and the expansion of social media and all things digital, as wonderful as they are, and let's say I'm not disparaging all of them, just disparaging the part of it that contributes to this toxicity that we have. We passed a piece of legislation here called the Elvis Act, ensuring likeness, voice, and image security. It's an AI protective piece of legislation for artists who can have their careers destroyed by artificial intelligence and technology. So we use artificial intelligence at the state. We use artificial intelligence to create efficiencies and to improve the way we serve our customers. But artificial intelligence, when inappropriately used, can destroy an industry which is critical to Tennessee's future. It's one example I give about why social media is not in itself the cause, but it contributes. Yes, it's gotten worse. When I ran for office, I do think it's possible, y'all, to move in a different direction and have positive responses to it. Sometimes the stuff we hear, even today, can be a little overwhelming, like how in the world are we ever gonna move against this moving tide of increasing incivility? But I decided when I was going to run for office that I would not campaign negatively. I would not run a negative campaign ad. I would not say anything negative about anyone. And if I didn't win, I wouldn't win. But I wasn't going to do it, even though initially there was a lot of conversation about how you have to do that to be in politics. I didn't do it. And I didn't do it in my re-election campaign either. And I've worked to try and be a person who says we don't have to disparage other people in order to move ahead. Now, there are those who argue that, in certain cases, in certain races, if you don't do it, you're not going to win. I can't speak to that. All I could do is say, in my approach to this, I have said there's just some things I'm not going to do, and we'll see how that works out. I think there's an appetite for that. And you talked about a silent majority here. I do think there's an appetite for it. There's no prescriptive method for that. And I do not criticize another candidate for running their campaigns differently than I did. I just think we each have to find our own way to say, how can we lean into this idea, talk about it more, elevate that conversation to a greater degree, and do our part to recognize the problem here and see how we can contribute to it.
So you can see why I like this guy. When I decided to run for governor, Abby and I had a similar conversation, and we had people tell us that you couldn't win a race today in modern politics without running negative ads against your opponents. And we figured we were willing to lose trying. And you were one of the examples that we pointed to. We're like, well, he did it. And if he can do it, maybe we can do it too. And so you see how that works, as David French mentioned earlier, that kind of giving permission or showing that there's a better way. And so you directly influenced us, and we were also able to win. Although I am up for re-election, and some days I really want to run those negative ads, I will say. But we're holding strong. So thank you for that. I'd love to, if you don't mind, I don't want to get too personal, but we have a mutual friend who you honored recently as the Tennessean of the Year, and he was talking to me about that. In fact, we're going to get a chance to see him later today, Brad Paisley. And during that event, you talked about someone who disagreed with you, and I know we have these experiences where someone comes up to us and they're pretty angry and pretty upset, and it's easy to fight back. That's kind of our nature. I do it sometimes. I catch myself. Sometimes I don't. But I'm curious if you could share a little bit about how you deal with that when somebody just passionately disagrees with you personally. It's one thing to kind of do it in a campaign. It's another thing when it's one-on-one.
I recently actually had the most poignant example of that for me, and it was a teaching moment for me. There was a young man who was killed in our state. His name was Tyree Nichols. It was a year and a half ago at the hands of mishandled police brutality. He basically was killed in sort of a misidentification. I don't know all the details. No one ever will. But the boy should not have died in that situation and setting. Those particular officers were indicted, but it was a terrible situation for our state. It was a very, you can imagine. There's a young African-American boy not in Nashville, but over in Memphis, and very, very emotionally wrought moment in time for our state. I went to see his parents after that happened, simply to go see them. I just asked a friend of mine who knew them, hey, I'd love to just stop in, go to their house, which I did. We had a very, somber and whatever. It was their son had just been killed, but I was there to say, I got no answer here. I'm just telling you, I'm sympathetic, and I'm really, really sorry this ever happened. A year later, there was a piece of legislation moving through the legislature, and I won't get into all the details, but his mother did not like that piece of legislation at all. She felt like that it was offensive. It was a slap in the face to what had happened in the city, and I viewed that piece of legislation differently. It wasn't my proposed legislation, but it came through the General Assembly. But I understood the complexity of it. It was a very complex issue. She asked if she could come see me to talk about vetoing the bill. And people oftentimes want to, Tennessee has a very interesting arrangement set up. Most states don't have this, but a veto from the governor is overridden by a simple majority. So we don't have any veto power here.
Which, by the way, makes no sense to me, but it's amazing.
Makes no sense to me either, which is why we don't veto things, because there's not a lot of, the governor has particular powers that others don't, and every state's different, but our state, the veto power is, so the same people that vote for a piece of legislation just vote for it twice and overrides a veto. But she was coming to me to talk about vetoing the legislation, because she probably thought I could stop it. And as I've described to some other people, this woman let me have it in my office, sitting across the table from me. And she held back nothing about her emotion, how she felt about it, and what she thought about this piece of legislation and what it meant personally to her. And this is a woman who lost her son and who'd been through incredible amount of pain. And it was the most respectful let me have it that I'd ever had in my life. I sat across the table from that woman and said, I've never had an encounter with anyone who disagreed so, vehemently with me and wanted to express their passionate disagreement with me in such a respectful way as the way that you have delivered that to me today. I have to tell you, I'm overwhelmed by your grace and your deliverance and whatever. We ended up talking, understood, we discussed the differences, where we were going with this, hugs and love and respect for one another, and walked out the door and said, we'll meet again. I walked away from that going, I've got to learn how to have the same kind of heart that woman has, because she was convincing, and she was, anyway. That's the most poignant and recent example. I think that if we will take the time to get to know someone who does not think like we do and who is thinking in opposite direction and sort of opposing the things that we're doing, if we will just take the time to get to know them a little bit, we may never change our opinion, and we have, look, it's the way our country is set up, right? There's democracy, there's elected officials, decisions are made based on the will of those that have been put in position, and then the people change that if they don't like the decisions that those people are making. But at the end of the day, if we would get to know people, it's one of the hardest things about politics. I say it all the time. People don't know me. When you become a public figure, they don't know you, they just know about you. And they know about you based on whichever feed they've read about you. And they don't know me. And it's why I was in a meeting the other day, and some guy was there, and we had a really good, there's a group of folks, and I spoke, and I told a little bit of my story, why I ran for office, what I was doing, what I was hoping to do, my respect for people. We talked a little bit about this dignity of every human being. And afterwards, a guy came up to me. It was an African-American guy, and he said, I got to tell you, before I came tonight, to me, you were just probably going to be, and he paused, and I said, white Christian nationalist? And he was like, yep, that's what I thought you would be, whatever that is. And I said, that's what happens when we don't know anything about each other. And I don't know how to solve that problem. And I'm eagerly listening to people to say, what do we do about it? We can talk about it. We can certainly try to model it. David French was talking this morning about fruits of the Spirit. I have them post them so I can go patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Are you doing that? When you stand in front of a group of, hostile questioners, or a group of protesters, or a group, is that what they see when they see your responses? I don't know. I'm trying to make certain of that. I certainly do know that he also referenced the scripture about, loving your enemies and praying for those who hate you. And I remember saying, I want to become a better person. I've never really known what it was like to be hated until I got into this job. Now I do. and now I get to practice loving people who hate me. And if we can each find our way to lean into this, I think we can have an impact in the culture around us.
Governor, our time is short, and
I'll
somehow
answer more quickly.
No. I just want to say somehow you just summed up a year's worth of my work in like 5 minutes, better than I could have. I mean, every part of that answer is exactly what the experts tell us we need to do if we are going to change this. I do want to give you a chance, just the last word today. We've been talking a lot about families, kids, relationships there. We've talked kind of generally about the state of politics in your state and in our nation. We've talked specifically about people who disagree with us. You're a dad. I'd love you to maybe just, if you don't mind, just talking about why this is important. Those relationships matter in our families.
A dad and a grandfather. My 11th grandson was adoption was finalized in Korea yesterday. So
cool.
I haven't seen him yet, but I'm very excited about that. It's interesting you say that. I hadn't thought about this, but I raised 4 children. My first wife and I, you met Maria, my current wife and first lady and the love of my life, but my first wife and I had 4 children, and I was actually thinking when we were talking about family conflicts, a little bit of what our family's life was like, just back and forth with kids and the challenges you have and the arguments you have and the way your family tries to navigate life. And then my first wife was killed in an accident when I was 40, and my kids were pretty young. And I had one teenager, she was 12 actually, and then 2 boys that are 9 and a daughter that was 4. And I have a remarkable relationship with my children. And part of the reason is because at that moment in time, everything changed for our family. All of the trivial was set aside. All of the things that anyone argued about or fought over suddenly didn't matter. My kids suddenly, I'm a little bit emotional saying this, just on the verge of, but my children suddenly looked out for each other and watched out for each other and cared for each other and were worried about each other. And we had these little family gatherings where we were like, we can do this, y'all. And it entirely changed the direction of our family. Now, we have trauma and the aftermath of dealing with all of that as a family here, 25 years later. My kids could all tell you, about the trauma they have from their father raising them as a single dad for 8 years. But the reason I say that is I do think the things that cause, there was a discussion this morning about common purpose and shared purpose. If we could find a shared purpose like my kids and I did at one moment in time when we desperately had to have a shared purpose and the rest of it didn't matter nearly as much as the shared purpose, if we could ever do that, that's how we find breakthrough going forward. So I'm glad you asked about my family. It's been a really good example for me of how to keep the main thing, and remind that, when we're dealing with someone, it might be their pain or my pain or all these things that contribute to our inability to function as we should as human beings with common and equal worth and dignity. If we can keep that the focus, I think we'll move in the right direction.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the good guys, Governor Bill Lee.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.